one of America's most influential Hispanics, Mike Madrid.
That is longtime political strategist Mike Madrid being announced as one of the most influential Latinos. Here is Mike's outstanding new book. It's called The Latino Century, How America's Largest Minority is Transforming Democracy. I couldn't recommend it more. Mike Madrid, welcome to The Issue Is for the first time. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
One of the smartest guys in the state. So for people that haven't read it yet and maybe don't know that much about your background, can you give us the sort of elevator pitch of your life?
Well, I'm a Republican political consultant. Spent about 30 years in Republican politics, but I also have always worked with and been fascinated by the Latino vote, this emerging change of what's going to shape the country. That's helped me build a lot of friendships, relationships across the aisle. I have one of the few unique distinctions in this country, really, of running campaigns at very high levels for Democrats as well. So I've worked across both sides of the aisle. I argue in my book that neither party really understands this vote. I think we're seeing that play out in real time, not only in Washington, but also in Sacramento. And I think the country's in for this crash of reality as Latinos become a bigger part of the electorate on both sides of the aisle.
And you've worked hard against Donald Trump over the years, but still believe in a lot of the conservative values that made you a Republican to begin with.
Yeah, I think I'm still a Republican that way, a classical Reagan conservative, but co-founded the Lincoln Project to work against Donald Trump.
So give us some insight into why Latinos are voting for Donald Trump.
Yeah, it has a lot to do with economic populism. One, the Latino vote is the fastest growing segment of the blue collar working class. This is where we're seeing the largest shift to the right. Latinos are becoming much less animated by racial and ethnic issues, much more by economic pocketbook issues. My book was essentially a prediction. Back in June, we talked about this, of what was likely to come. It's always, I think, in some ways nice to be right in a prediction in a book and why it happened, but seeing Donald Trump elected probably wasn't what I would prescribe for what ails the country at this moment in time.
And also, as Latinos are here for multi-generations, you see a big change in that sense as well, right?
Yeah, and that's the biggest differentiation between Latinos is not whether or not you speak Spanish, it's not your country of origin, the difference between Cubans and Venezuelans and Mexican Americans. The largest demarcation by large measure is generational differences, and it is about 80% of Latinos are now U.S. born. That's dramatically different than 15 or 20 years ago. It's these younger, under 30, U.S.-born, English-dominant Latinos that are rejecting sort of the politics of immigration being the prime view the way that they view the world, and it's much more focused on affordability, much more focused on economic pocketbook issues and the inaffordability of California to live and work.
And you've kind of found that the longer they're here, the more they sort of view immigration like white people do.
That's exactly right. In fact, about a month before this last election in November, Telemundo did a poll showing 63% of Latinos felt the undocumented were a burden. That 63% is the exact same percentage of white voters that voted for Proposition 187 in 1994.
So if this whole thing is about affordability, is this tariffs, which we see happening now, potentially a huge Achilles heel for Trump?
There's no question. The souring economy, the loss of consumer confidence. I do have very high-level conversations with Democrats. My suggestion to them, my free advice to Democrats is start blaming the Trump tax or this Republican tax on housing. All Canadian lumber. Most of our homes are built with lumber from Canada. You start slapping a 25-30% tariff on taxes on Canadian lumber, you're dramatically increasing the cost of housing.
What do you make of the Democratic approach to this? The Democrats seem split on whether to put forward a budget, shut down the government, fighting with each other.
In many ways, the Democrats are not atypical of a party that's in the wilderness trying to find itself, but I think the dysfunction is really indicative of a larger generational split and perhaps even an ideological split. I think they're really due for a Tea Party moment, where there's going to be much more populist sentiment running against the establishment leaders of their own party. And I think you're going to start seeing a lot more outsider candidates being much more successful, both for governor and for president of the United States.
So one of the things Democrats are split on right now is Gavin Newsom's podcast.
Yeah.
You wrote a great Substack about this, sort of looking at his motivations.
Yeah.
What's your main point?
Well, my main point was this was either the worst launch for a presidential campaign in history, or it was the most brilliant launch of a media company in history. This is a generational talent. Whether you agree with Gavin Newsom or not, he is definitely one of the leaders of the Democratic Party. He may or may not run for president, but there's no question in my mind that this is about building an infrastructure to communicate with Americans broadly, Californians perhaps specifically, with a very non-traditional audience, and that's something the Democrats as a party have not figured out yet. He seems to be the first.
Is there an argument, though, that maybe it does help him run for president? Not clearly he's pissed off the left.
Yeah.
Clearly the right, super right, is suspicious of him.
Yeah.
But folks in the middle, does it help with them, maybe?
I don't know that it helps directly in terms of being convincing MAGA that suddenly Gavin Newsom is a moderate. I don't see that. But what I do believe is happening is there are now many, many thousands, hundreds of thousands of new voices listening to him, tuning into him that weren't otherwise. And that's how you start to begin to change.
So obviously the assumption is that he's running for president, but you think he might not be?
I think he might not be. Let me put it this way. I don't believe that launching this podcast and having Charlie Kirk and Michael Savage and Steve Bannon was part of launching a presidential campaign. I don't believe that. I do believe he's building the media infrastructure to have a national megaphone when he leaves the governor's office in 2 years. Whether he runs for president or not, he's absolutely going to be the central voice of the Democratic Party for the next few years.
You think so?
I
Wow.
believe so.
Let's talk about the governor's race.
Yeah.
You've been involved in California's governor's race before. You just were here and saw our interview with Katie Porter.
Yeah.
What did you make of what she said and her launch this week?
I think Katie has actually a very interesting message because she does come from a sort of populist left wing of the party, the Elizabeth Warren wing of the party, that is in many ways very anti-institutional. But I think that being just in elected office makes it very difficult to credibly make the case that Democrats have brought down housing in the state because they haven't, or have made the economy better for working class people because they haven't in California, or made education better because they haven't, or homelessness better because they haven't. The Democrats need their own Sister Soldier moment. They need a huge pivot away from the voices that have held elected office and forced them to have a real honest conversation about how to best protect the values they say they believe in, especially when it comes to working class, poor people, and those on the margins.
I mean, in fairness to Porter, she hasn't been in any of those statewide offices here before, but it didn't seem like she had a lot of specifics in terms of an actual plan on how to do it.
I mean, I'll leave that to the interview and for the viewers on Katie with Katie Porter. I like Katie. I think she actually does bring some excitement and energy to the national discussion. But we'll have to those specific policy proposals I'll leave to other Democrats.
Last time around, you ran Antonio Villaraigosa's campaign for governor. You write about in the book the fact that you guys used to be warring with each other, and then you ended up getting together. He's running for governor. Seems to be going sort of running against the party. What do you make of what he's doing?
Well, that's one of the reasons I wanted to work for him in 2018 is he had the courage to kind of stand up and say, we're heading in the wrong direction. In many ways, the lessons that the Democratic Party learned in 2024 were exactly the messages we were running on in 2018 for governor, and the party went in a different direction, and you can see what's happened to the Democratic Party as a result. The question is, and Antonio and I are very close, consider him like a father. Is that message and him as a messenger still as resonant? How big is that lane? If you've got 7 or 8 candidates in the field, I think that's one thing. If it's just Kamala Harris and 1 or 2 candidates, it's something entirely different.
Do you think the winner of that race has gotten into the race yet?
The winner of
the governor's race?
I don't. I think the winner is probably in there somewhere.
Of the current crop?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Is there anybody you're especially interested or excited about?
I'm watching very closely and will probably be advising Steve Klubeck's race for governor.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So somebody who's been
a lot of people maybe not have heard of, who's a business guy who is running sort of as an outsider.
He's an outsider.
Sort of as an outsider. He's running as an outsider.
He's running as a complete outsider, but a lifelong Democrat. Somebody who's given to Democratic causes, candidates, was tapped by Barack Obama to lead up Brand USA to kickstart tourism in the wake of 9/11. Somebody who's a successful Californian first and foremost, but my interest in this, and what I think is going to be most resonant, is he's willing to challenge the orthodoxy. You're hearing Katie Porter talk earlier, rightfully so. We probably need to start CEQA all over again, not just tinker on the edges. It's been a crisis for black and brown people and working class people in the state to get housing for 20 years. Why are we just now beginning to talk about this? Some people have been, and they need their voices elevated in the Democratic Party.
So you're Klubeck over Caruso.
I'm Klubeck over Caruso.
Interesting.
Yeah.
We like to do something on this show. Well, why? Why Klubeck over Caruso?
I think Caruso's fine. I think he's a great candidate. I think he'd make a great mayor of Los Angeles. I think that's probably what he wants. That seems to be where he's leaning. I think they have very similar qualities and candidates. I know that they know each other. I just think that the $100 million he spent becoming mayor of Los Angeles, I think proved in large parts that he was prescient on what LA needed, especially in times of crisis. I think if he wants to be mayor of LA, it's there for the taking. I think if you had Caruso and Klubeck being both mayor and governor, you've got a real change for California's fortunes, and I expect that might be what we end up seeing.
Interesting. All the conservatives in the race keep saying Caruso for mayor. Let's end with something called personal issues.
Yeah.
It's where we get to know your cultural favorites.
Okay.
First thing that comes to mind: what is your favorite TV show?
Boy, I don't watch a whole lot of TV, but I watch a lot of documentaries.
Any favorite documentaries?
I just finished the last Made in America documentary with O.J. Simpson for a reason. Jim Newton, LA Times reporter, was a big part of that story.
One of the best documentaries ever.
Yeah.
Favorite movie?
Of all time?
Sure.
The original To Kill a Mockingbird.
Favorite book of all time?
I'm reading, I think, what might be my favorite book right now, which is Alexis de Tocqueville's on Democracy in America.
There's a throwback.
Yeah. It's been around a while.
Yeah.
Not an original copy.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And who is your role model?
Boy, my role model. Father Cosgrove, I think, a priest who kind of taught me the benefit of always looking out for the least among us and fighting for the least among us, regardless of the way the rest of the world sees you.
That is a great lesson and a great thing to end on.
Yeah.
Mike Madrid.
Always a pleasure.
Great to have you
Great
on
to
the
thanks
show.
for
Thank
having
you
me.
so much. We really appreciate it.